Today I want to talk about churches.
A Catholic church on First Nation land in Penticton.
The tower is on fire now.
We could feel the heat on their skin as fire destroyed an Anglican church across the street from their home.
Last year in Canada in 2021, dozens of churches were burned to the ground in this country, and many more were subject to vandalism and other hate crimes. Well, it's been nearly a year later, and at Public Safety, the committee that I sit on, we've been talking about ideologically motivated violent extremism. But what we haven't been talking about is these dozens of churches that were burned to the ground and vandalized last year. Why did this happen in a country like Canada, where we have religious toleration, celebration of religious freedom? Why did this happen? Well, let's take it back to 2021. As we were going into the summer, we had some terrible, tragic news about the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves in Kamloops, British Columbia. And these unmarked graves were situated near a residential school, which had operated for many decades. And we're still discovering the full extent of unmarked graves across Canada. What we saw in the months following that was a campaign, a disorganized campaign to burn down churches in Canada. And in my very own riding, in the town of Morinville, we saw the beautiful, iconic Saint Jean Baptiste Church, which has stood in my riding for over 100 years, burned to the ground. And I live about an hour away from the church, so I immediately got in my car. It was about 6 a.m, and I rushed over to the church. I saw the whole town of Morinville, families, early in the morning, all standing and watching as the remnants of this beautiful church burned to the ground. And the people of Morinville all had tears in their eyes. And I remember walking through the crowd and talking to people, and we pledged to rebuild the church. And I pledged to help find justice for this community. Let's go back a second to the burning of the churches. Was this just some sort of simple criminal act? Well, maybe the burning of one church could have been a criminal act. But when we're looking at dozens of churches being burned down for the purpose of intimidating a faith community, that meets the definition of terrorism under Canadian law. In fact, we had CSIS, Canada's Security Intelligence Service, and Public Safety, and the RCMP come present to committee. And I actually looked through their 2021 report where they detail all the different attacks against all the different communities, and yet there was not even one mention of all the churches that were burned down in Canada last year. Now, I could understand if maybe one church burned down in isolation that it would be considered a criminal matter. But when you have dozens of churches in a connected campaign of hate and intimidation against a faith community, we're talking about something that is so much bigger than just a single crime. Now, a lot of people are going to say, Dane, you're just talking about, Catholics and Christians, but it's so much bigger than that. In my community of Morinville, it's a Franco-Albertan community. It's a Métis community. It's situated right next to a First Nation, Alexander First Nation, which is a proud Cree nation. And so many generations of Cree and Métis and Franco-Albertans and Catholic Albertans attended churches like Saint Jean Baptiste. And when burning it to the ground, you're not just making a statement about vengeance for something that happened in the past. You're intimidating an entire community, a community that includes Indigenous people who are the victims of residential schools. And so I think it's doubly important for our government, our federal government, to work with our law enforcement agencies to reinforce that there is no room for hatred in our country. And I'm talking about all kinds of hatred. But what we saw with these 30 plus churches last year, is that the government really doesn't appear to be taking this very seriously. I had the Minister of Public Safety, Minister Marco Mendicino, at committee, and I asked him about these churches. And he said he condemned the burning of these churches. But I asked him, I said, Minister, did you ever condemn this when it actually happened? And he couldn't say. And the fact is, the minister couldn't be bothered to condemn the burning of these churches until I actually brought it up to him nearly a year later at committee. And I think that's a real shame, because what we've seen from this government and from the security agencies like CSIS and Public Safety that answer to this government is we've seen that there really isn't a lot of desire to talk about this issue. But it is a real issue. It's a hurtful issue. It's an issue that we need to resolve, and it's an issue we need to bring justice to the communities that have suffered. And I think, by bringing attention to this important matter, we're doing an important work to stamp out hate in this country. Because as some witnesses of National Security Committee have said, if groups think that they can act with impunity, if they don't believe the government is going to prosecute them, if they don't believe there's consequences for their actions, they will act again. And we need to send a strong message. And the government has not been sending a strong message. As I said, the minister was only bothered to condemn these actions nearly a year later when I demanded it of him at committee. We need stronger action from this government to ensure that these groups do not act with impunity. So I'm going to keep fighting. I'm reading your comments. I really appreciate the great feedback we're getting on our videos. Please subscribe to our videos, share them with your friends. We want to get this message out, and we want to see your feedback. Thanks for watching.